Hello, this is not battle content. I'm just using Showdown as a visual aid this time. This is about the Pokemon Direct. Loosely about the Pokemon Direct that happened this week. It definitely got my imagination kicking into gear as we got some pretty interesting information on current and upcoming games. I thought it was a pretty solid Direct overall. I saw it got some mixed reception around the internet, but I thought it was a good one. I liked a lot of the news that came out of it. A lot of it caught my interest. The thing that personally hyped me up the most, maybe it's a little silly, but it was the shiny Treasures of Ruin finally being distributed. 3 very good shiny designs, and also Tinglu is pretty decent. So looking forward to finally being able to have those in my game. Of course, Wo-Chan raid's ongoing right now as I'm recording. I'm doing my part. We also got some information on Pokemon Champions. We still don't know a lot about that game, but we know a bit more now than we did before, and I'm reserving judgment a little bit, but I'm reserving judgment less than I did before because we saw something in that Direct that looks more likely than not pretty groundbreaking. I still don't know for sure that Champions will be used for VGC or anything like that, but if it is a battle platform significantly embraced by the Pokemon Company and the Pokemon Company International, potentially being able to adjust EVs up and down on the fly is a big deal. I only say potentially because I don't know exactly how the victory points system is going to work out, right? Obviously, there's an in-game cost to doing that. I don't know how reasonable or onerous that cost will be. We'll see how everything is implemented. But that looks like a very big deal. And then, of course, there was information on Pokemon Legends ZA, returning characters, returning concepts like Alpha Pokemon apparently are back. A little bit more of a look at what's going on in Lumio City. Emma is back. If you were a big Mabel fan, Mabel is back too. And the biggest news, of course, for Legends ZA was the reveal of Mega Dragonite. And with that, by the way, confirmation that there are going to be new Mega Pokemon in Legends ZA. Honestly, I didn't think it was a sure thing. Would Game Freak really bring back Mega Evolution after all this time and not add new Megas? Yeah, honestly, I thought that was plausible, but I'm glad that's not what they're doing. Addressing the giant wings in the room, I like Mega Dragonite quite a bit. I saw it too got mixed reactions around the internet, but I'm definitely fond of it, for sure. I think it's really good. It's not, like, instantly my favorite Mega design. It's probably not going to be top 3 or anything like that for me, but it's a solid one. Look, ultimately, a lot of what goes into designing a Mega Pokemon is taking what the Pokemon's design is about, maybe what its evolutionary family's designs more broadly are about. Obviously, there's a fair bit of Dragonair in Mega Dragonite, and really sort of pushing them to the next level, really doubling down on the things that make that Pokemon what it is. And so I think it was a very good sign that I saw Mega Dragonite in the Direct, and I thought, yeah, that's Mega Dragonite right there. That fits Dragonite's vibes extremely well. Honestly, quite a bit better than some of the fan designs I've seen recently. And it's very recognizably a Dragonite, but it also has that exaggerated Mega Evolution quality to it. I think it hits exactly the right note. It's a little bit awkward, but Mega designs sometimes are, because they're not quite natural creatures in the way that non-Mega Pokemon are. It's pretty good. But it got my brain thinking, what other Pokemon would I like to see get Mega Evolutions in Legends ZA? And that's what this video is about. And I'm going to be clear, this is just me talking about what I'd like to see. This is a pure wish listing video. This is the kind of thing that in a lot of discussion forums would get my post deleted because it doesn't really add anything of substance to the conversation. But this is my platform. I decide what goes here. I get to do my wish listing here. This video is not a prediction. In fact, I think a lot of what I'm going to say here is very unlikely. It's just things that are of interest to me when I brainstorm what kinds of Mega Pokemon they could add, things that I might like to see. Also, just to address this, I have not read any leaks for Legends ZA. I don't want to read any leaks for Legends ZA. If you post a leak in the comments, I will see what I can do about that. I don't want to see it. I am not perfectly consistent about leaks in Pokemon, but I don't often read them, and more these days, I think that I'm better off when I don't read them. So if what I say happens to match any leaks, that is a coincidence. I don't know about it. But, again, just me spitballing, just my list, and I have broken it up by generation. I think it's a lot more manageable that way, so I'm going to do a top 5 list, not for all Pokemon overall, but for each generation, megas that I think would be interesting to see added to the series. I looked at each generation in isolation, so sometimes I might say multiple Pokemon that fill the same niche and would probably not all be done together, but that's okay, we're just going to roll with that. And there's not, as for the criteria that I looked at, there's not really anything specific. It's not like I had a rubric for this, but generally, if I could imagine easily what the mega design might look like, that was a plus for a given Pokemon. If it's a Pokemon that's kind of overshadowed, that I think could use that little bit of boost to make it more noteworthy in the series again, that could be considered a plus. I pretty well stayed away from starters and legendaries, just for the most part. I will be breaking that rule immediately, but I mostly stayed away from starters and legendaries just because, I don't know, they feel like they should be handled a little bit differently. I did not strictly stay away from Pokemon that have other super forms, like Gigantamax forms, or just exclusive mechanics like Z moves and stuff. Even Pokemon that have regional variants, Pokemon that have been gotten some kind of attention from newer generations already. I didn't strictly stay away from them, but that was a little bit of a reason for me to move on past a certain Pokemon and not do that one. And finally, as far as the process goes, last night I scrolled through a list of every Pokemon. I made a quick short list off the cuff off the top of my head for each generation. And then I made a top 5 list, but I kept the short list, didn't delete it, made a top 5 list, went to bed, got up today, went back through the lists, made any changes that I felt like making after sleeping on it or thinking of Pokemon that I overlooked when I scrolled through the list. With all that said, let's go right ahead and jump into Generation 1. My top 5, it'll be 5-ish for each generation. There are some instances where I've grouped more than one Pokemon together, but I promise those will all be justified. My top 5 for Generation 1, and right off the bat, we are going to start here with Charizard. Number 5, Charizard. This is, I'm half kidding. This is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. But if they want to do Mega Charizard Z, or Mega Charizard A, or Mega Charizard Sigma, so be it. I am down to see what they come up with. Honestly, I don't think there is actually much more that can be done with Charizard's design. As far as Mega Evolution goes, X and Y sort of burned a lot of the turf already there. But if they've got something, let's be honest, the real reason I have Charizard on this list is that it would be pretty funny to watch some people get mad about it. Okay, you want a more serious kind of honorable mention? Maybe like Nidoking, Nidoqueen, Rapidash. Those didn't quite make my list. But I think Charizard, I don't think Game Freak would actually troll their fans like this. I'm not sure they could make a new Mega Charizard and interpret it as trolling themselves. But I think it would be pretty funny to see. And that's enough to get Charizard number 5 on my Gen 1 list. Number 4 for Gen 1, I don't know how well this one will go over either, but I am completely serious about it. It's Raichu. Raichu is a fantastic Pokemon design. I think it holds up extremely well as not one of my very, very, very favorites in the series, but just a really solid Pokemon that I've liked a lot for a long time. All that said, Raichu is kind of overshadowed by the fact that it evolves from the mascot of the entire series, and so Pikachu gets a ton of attention, Pikachu gets new forms, exclusive Gigantamax forms, Z move, you name it. Raichu does get a regional variant, but that's quite a while ago now, and it's not very good in competitive play or anything like that, so it's still pretty overshadowed. I think Raichu deserves some attention. I think genuinely, let Raichu shine separately from Pikachu a little bit, give it a Mega form. There also, of course, is, as we know, a lot of reason to believe that Raichu originally was intended to evolve into something else. I think we have some information out there on what that was supposed to look like. Now, unfortunately, I think Game Freak would probably not use that inspiration for a Mega Raichu because a lot of fan art has done that already. But it could be interesting to see them dig up some very, very old, 30-ish year old ideas, if they could find a way to do it that they would think is reasonable, and incorporate that into Mega Raichu's design. So for a couple of different reasons, I think Raichu is a strong candidate for a Mega form. Number 3 in Gen 1, honestly, I'm not completely sure how I feel about this. Maybe somebody else like Rapidash could have snuck in here, but I'm going to go with Wigglytuff. It's time to introduce to this list a new criterion for what makes a Pokemon a good candidate for Mega Evolution. Some Pokemon on this list I just want to see what it would be like if they double down on something about the design. So Wigglytuff, big round balloon. Let's go bigger, rounder balloon if we can. Let's see what they can do with that design, what kind of limits they can push. I'm genuinely really interested in seeing what that would look like. Also, Wigglytuff is a classic Pokemon that is, you know, it's not terrible. I mean, it seems like it should be terrible. I mean, it gets competitive. It's got a... Okay, that special attack stat is actually pretty bad, but with competitive, right, you could do something. Got Fairy typing in Gen 6. I feel like Wigglytuff has room to be pushed a little bit more so that if we ever get these Megas in competitive play, it could actually be pretty solid, actually do something. Also, and I hesitated on whether I really wanted to include this, but way back in a different time when ChatGPT was very new and when my overall attitude toward those generative AI models was less they should be shut down and more I don't really see much practical value in this, but it's kind of a fun, silly toy. I sat down and used ChatGPT as a fun, silly toy one evening. At this time, it didn't have access to new enough information that Gen 9 Pokemon could be included. I'm trying to be careful how I word this because, of course, I feel like people always have to be reminded ChatGPT doesn't know or think anything. It just strings words together, but it didn't have words about Gen 9 Pokemon to string together. But I sat down and I laid out the basic concept of a Paradox Pokemon, and I tried to get it to generate more Paradox Pokemon. Tried to just steer it towards stringing together words that were original concepts for Paradox Pokemon. And it did, with just one specifically, a Jigglypuff past Paradox, because it didn't know about it doesn't know anything. It didn't have access to information about Screamtail. It came up with a Jigglypuff past Paradox that it called Balloon Ancestor. Didn't really get the names down very well. And this was the only one where it came up with a signature move. Balloon Ancestor's signature move was Balloon Cannon. It was described as trying to inflate the opponent, and I believe it had a chance of lowering their speed. So however I feel about ChatGPT right now, Balloon Cannon has kind of stuck with me, and I'm down to see that implemented, or something like it, with Mega Wigglytuff. Trying to inflate the opponent, that's really something. Number 2 for Gen 1 might be a little bit of a surprise. It's a Pokemon that I truly don't think I would have come up with at all. Like, I don't think it would have occurred to me had I not gone through a list of every Pokemon, but that makes it exactly the kind of underdog that this exercise is for. My number 2 pick for Generation 1 is Seaking. Seaking is interesting not only because it's a very overshadowed underdog Pokemon. Even in its debut generation, there were so many water types, and it was certainly not the most interesting one. I also think Seaking is a relatively easy Mega to design because ultimately it's a big koi fish with big showy fins and a horn for some reason. I guess a lot of Gen 1 Pokemon were just an animal with a horn. But that means that Seaking has some very specific features that I think are pretty easy to double down on, exaggerate, however you want to put it, to create a design that fits the overall sort of aesthetic of Mega Evolution, which is, you know, the same Pokemon, but just more of it. Also, if they dig deeper in the Evolution family, Goldeen has largely the same kinds of features, but a different take on them. I think Mega Seaking would be a pretty easy design to put together. I think it would finally give some shine to a Pokemon that has always kind of flown under the radar, like I said, even its own debut generation. And again, if Mega see competitive play, you wonder what kind of niche might this have. Well, Seaking already gets Lightning Rod. It's already a water type with Lightning Rod. You could keep Lightning Rod on the Mega form. You could maneuver the stats so that maybe it's more of a special attacker, or it has a little bit more room to make use of Lightning Rod. You don't have to do it that way, but you could. You could also keep Swift Swim and do something with that instead. And all of a sudden, Seaking is practically a whole new Pokemon, while still being the same big koi fish with a horn. Finally, my number 1 pick for Generation 1, and this is one that I've seen heavily speculated recently, and that is Starmie. Starmie, where is it? Oh, it's way down here. Starmie is a Pokemon that I like quite a lot. It probably would be fair for me to say that it was one of my favorites in Gen 1. I don't know that it's quite held up with so many other Pokemon to like and appreciate over time, but it's a very cool Pokemon. It used to be awesome to use in competitive play in like the first 4 or so generations because this speed stat was a lot better then than it is now. Same goes for the special attack. And Starmie, of course, has you can't tell because it doesn't exist in Scarlet and Violet, but it had a crazy move pool with moves like not just the water and psychic stabs, but you could throw Ice Beam on it, Thunderbolt, I think Grass Knot in later generations, Power Gem. And then you could run Choice Starmie in some formats with Trick. Starmie is a Pokemon that has a rich, very interesting history in competitive play, and it's a very interesting design of a type that they don't really do much anymore. Starmie is... A lot of Pokemon now are very expressive, which can be nice. Starmie is intentionally the opposite, right? It's a very inscrutable design. It's meant to be very alien, while also just looking like a starfish. Its classification is literally the mysterious Pokemon. And one other thing, I didn't mention Clefable. Clefable was a strong contender for this list because I think you could double down on the alien inspirations and make like a weird cosmic creature out of it. You can do that with Starmie too. Starmie is strongly implied to have some kind of mysterious connection to outer space, probably extraterrestrial origins. You could go in a very weird cosmic direction with it while keeping that sort of inscrutable, mysterious nature. And I think it could be a very creative, very engaging Mega Pokemon that stands out quite a lot from what we usually see in Pokemon designs these days, and makes these stats and that move pool cool and impressive once again. So those are my picks for Gen 1, Charizard, Raichu, Wigglytuff, Seaking, Starmie. We move on now to Generation 2. I'm going to give an honorable mention in Gen 2 to Unknown. I am not kidding. This is not tongue-in-cheek. This is a very serious list, except Charizard. I am a bit of a sucker, as you probably could tell from that Starmie rant, for mysterious Pokemon of unknown origins that hint at deeper lore behind them that we never quite see. Unknown is a great example of that, and I think a Mega Unknown could... There are a few different ways you could do it, right? You could introduce a different writing system. You could make the writing harder to understand. You could tease the connection to Arceus that's been teased before. There are a number of things you could do. I think that's extremely unlikely that there would be a Mega Unknown. I think Unknown is a Pokemon that at this point they're not going to use where they don't feel like they have to. But it'd be interesting. But it doesn't quite make my top 5 list. I think it would be number 6 if there were a number 6 slot. Instead, number 5 here is Slowking. A little bit low-hanging fruit, but of course Mega Slowbro has existed since Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And it looks like this. It's a very funny guy. I really like this sort of creative take on a Mega design where the shell takes over. And you could do the same basic kind of thing with Slowking. I could see the shell basically... I don't think you need this gap with Slowking. I can see the shell basically reaching down to its legs. You could have eye holes for it. You could not have eye holes for it and force it to rely on its psychic power to navigate. Make it even more tanky because the shell is protecting its body. Okay, it's a little bit low-hanging fruit. Maybe it's not the most interesting, but I think it could be a funny design and complement Mega Slowbro very nicely. My number 4 pick for Gen 2 is Sudowoodo. This one's a pretty simple one. Sudowoodo is a Pokemon that was never especially strong, but is... just intriguing enough. It is, of course, a reigning Prismatic Draft League champion. It appeared in only 2 sets, but it put in work in the semifinals. It's a Pokemon that could probably use a little bit of a power boost, probably use a little bit of a design boost, now that we're not in Generation 2 anymore. And I imagine, I'm no artist, I only have the vaguest concept of what any of these Megas could look like, but I imagine you could push the fake tree thing pretty far with Sudowoodo, get creative about how a rock can look like a tree in a more... just a bigger, more elaborate design. So Sudowoodo is just a really neat Pokemon that I think could benefit from Mega Evolution. Number 3 for Generation 2, I'm going with Noctowl. Mega Pokemon, like we saw with Dragonite, sometimes borrow design traits from earlier stages in the evolution line. Honestly, I looked back at the past Mega Pokemon, and they don't do that as often as I thought I remembered, but it's definitely a thing sometimes. And Hoot Hoot has some very... memorable, very expressive design features that could be incorporated into a Mega Noctowl, I think in a very fun way. Whether it's the big red eyes, the clock hand, I don't know what to call them, whiskers, these things that look more like the hands of a clock on Hoot Hoot, just the round body shape. Hoot Hoot is a very memorable, sort of distinct Pokemon design. Bring a little bit more of that into Noctowl and maybe ramp up the psychic powers side of it. You could even make it a psychic and flying type if you want. I don't think that'd be necessary, but basically there are some specific design traits in this evolutionary family that are a little bit downplayed in Noctowl compared to how they are in Hoot Hoot, and I think if you double down and lean more into what makes Noctowl stand out from other quote-unquote early regional birds, early game birds, you can make it feel a little bit more special again. Number 2 on this list is, I think, a really obvious pick for Generation 2. You might be surprised it's not number 1. Well, I'll explain in a bit why it's not number 1. But you want to talk about an early game Pokemon that has the beginning of a cool design but could use a buff to really get there? Yeah, of course, Ledian makes the list. I think a lot of fans have designed a Mega Ledian at some point. Ledian should be great. Ledian looks like a ladybug that's ready to throw hands. I mean, what more could you ask for? Well, some base stats that are reasonable, or what you could ask for, right? Mega Beedrill is a very fun Mega Pokemon because it takes a weak early game Pokemon that you probably didn't carry to the end of your playthrough most of the time and actually makes it a threat. Mega Ledian, I think, would be an excellent implementation of the same kind of thing. I think Ledian could really use that love from Game Freak. I think this would be the easy number one, if not for specific personal reasons, to give the number one spot for Generation 2 to Sunflora. No need for an air balloon. So, honestly, this is just me remembering something that I said before and getting kind of stuck on it. When Mega Evolution was a brand new mechanic, one of the things that I found very appealing about it was the idea that over time, with a lot of work, it could in theory be scaled to any and every Pokemon. What I liked about Mega Evolution is a once per battle transformation. Yes, it was mostly focused on popular Pokemon like Charizard, Gengar, and I was going to say Dragonite, but that was just revealed. Charizard, Gengar, and Garchomp back at that time. But in theory, you know, a 100-point base stat increase goes a long way. You could give a Mega to any Pokemon just about, and it wouldn't necessarily be competitively viable, but it would be a lot more reasonable to build a team around it if it's your particular favorite or something. I thought Mega Evolution could open the door to people winning with their favorites, whatever their favorites might be, some amount more than was done otherwise, and I was looking forward to seeing more of that kind of thing in the future. Little did I know that at that time they were going to stop adding Mega designs, and eventually, in a move that I didn't like at the time, but I now see the wisdom of, come up with different gimmicks that are easier to scale to every Pokemon, you know, without having to be individually designed. All that said, my thinking at the time was they could make a Mega Sunflora, and whoever likes Sunflora out there, right? Sunflora could suddenly become good. I think I thought of Sunflora because it had a reputation in like Gens 3 and 4 for being maybe the weakest fully evolved Pokemon in the entire game. If you asked on competitive forums back then what the weakest one was, there's a good chance the answer you get would be Sunflora. And so I thought, sure, Mega Evolution is focused on the likes of Charizard and Blaziken now, but if they want, they could give anything a Mega. They could scale this all the way to Sunflora, and all of a sudden Sunflora is usable in competitive play. How cool is that? I mean, I'm not a big Sunflora fan, but somebody probably likes Sunflora quite a lot, and they get to take advantage of that. And of course, that never happened. Sunflora never got the Mega. Sunflora has never gotten any kind of special gimmick form. But we're talking a little bit about rooting for some underdogs here. I've been rooting hard for Sunflora ever since I had that thought however many years ago, just because it was the first thing that popped into my head as a weak, unviable Pokemon, beyond most others even. So I'm still rooting for Sunflora. I want Sunflora to get something. We might as well see Mega Sunflora right now. And that's my list for Generation 2, Slowking, Sudowoodo, Noctowl, Ledian, and Sunflora. Moving on to Gen 3. There are quite a few Gen 3 Megas already, but something I found looking through the list is that it's really not that hard to come up with more candidates in Gen 3 for a Mega form. Gen 3 designs are great. I'm very fond of a lot of them, but a lot of them feel like they could use that boost to sort of stay imposing and powerful looking in light of the many Pokemon designs that have come since, with different design principles behind them. And because there are a lot of very interesting looking, there are a lot of very interesting looking Gen 3 Pokemon, a lot of them have been kind of overshadowed even since Gen 3 was new. In the same kind of way that I said Seeking has always been kind of an underdog, so let's give it a win now. It's really not that hard to find Gen 3 Pokemon for which the same thought can apply. So actually, I had a little bit of trouble, even though there are already so many Gen 3 Megas, narrowing down just which ones were going to make my list. And this is the first time that we are going to have two different Pokemon in the 5 slot. You could call it a tie if you want, but they're kind of a package deal, I think. My number 5 pick for Generation 3 is Huntail and Gorbis. First of all, when was the last time you thought of these Pokemon? They could probably use a bit of a boost in prestige, right? Second, honestly, their designs are kind of fun. I mean, Huntail is kind of just deep sea eel, but it's a Pokemon. But it's such a weird, interesting creature design. I mean, because it's based on a weird, interesting animal, but you don't see many Pokemon like this. It has kind of a fascinating stat spread, very usable attacks back in Gen 3 on both sides of the spectrum. It gets Shell Smash, of course, at least in some of its appearances, because it evolves from Clamperl, and Clamperl gets Shell Smash. Huntail is a very weird, interesting Pokemon that just isn't quite interesting enough to capture the attention of most players. Even me, I kind of forget about Huntail sometimes. I would like to see Huntail get something to really put it to that next level where it can shine in all its weirdness. I don't care as much about Gorbis, but Gorbis is kind of a package deal with Huntail, and they could definitely take this in some creative directions too, right? And since both of these Pokemon are very different from their pre-evolved form, it would be interesting to see if they could borrow some elements from earlier in the evolutionary line, right? Whether it's incorporating a shell somehow or a pearl. There are a number of different creative directions they could go with Huntail and Gorbis. It doesn't have to just be bigger, scary eel. So that's my number 5 for Generation 3. The more I talk it through, the more I think maybe they should even be higher on the list, but there are plenty of other good candidates, like I said. My number 4 pick for Generation 3 is Swalot. Messed up the timing there. Swalot is a Pokemon that I've always liked quite a bit. For like no good reason. It's just a big stomach with a mustache, but for some reason that really entertained me as a kid, and it felt pretty strong using it like in the middle of the story in the Hoenn games, around when it becomes available, around the 3rd gym. It's actually like kind of tanky for that point in those games. So Swalot is another Pokemon that I've always kind of liked, but just is not able to do very much beyond that mid-game situation. Did you remember that Swalot is in Scarlet and Violet? Because it is, but I can't really think of much competitive use for it. Give it a Mega, see what you can do to fix it. My number 3 pick for Generation 3 is Wailord. Honestly, just how big will it get? Some of these, I'm just curious to see what would happen when they commit harder to what makes this Pokemon's design what it is. Wailord is massive, inflated looking, vaguely blimp-like whale. Does it go even bigger? Does it go more blimp-like? I'm very curious to see what would happen. That's why Wailord's on the list. Number 2 for Generation 3 is Masquerain. It's my Draft League mascot. I've never yet actually drafted it. We get Mega Masquerain in a competitive format. We get a draft with Megas. Maybe I see what I can do with it. It's also just a Pokemon that's kind of easily overshadowed. Not a bad design, but doesn't especially stand out in its own region with a whole bunch of not bad designs. Let's give it a bit of attention. And my number 1 pick for Generation 3 probably needs no explanation. It's Flygon. You probably could figure that it was Flygon. I love Flygon. Always have since I was a kid. And Gen 3 was brand new. Let's see it get that attention that it's badly wanted for a while, shall we? Quick summary of my Gen 3 picks. Number 5, Huntail and Gorbis. 4, Swalot. 3, Wailord. 2, Masquerain. 1, Flygon. Let's move on to Gen 4. As usual for this kind of video, this is taking longer than I anticipated. Gen 4. So my number 5 pick for Gen 4 is actually a Pokemon that was not on my shortlist last night. This is why it's good that I went through and revised a little bit today, because even scrolling through a list of every Pokemon, some of them kind of flew under my radar, which is a good sign that they're probably the kind of underdog Pokemon that could use some attention, say in the form of a Mega Form, right? So this one, I sort of woke up today and I realized, wait, why isn't that on my shortlist? I must have just completely scrolled past it by mistake, and so I fixed the mistake, and number 5 for Generation 4 is Carnivine. Carnivine also, by the way, available in X and Y just outside of Lumiose City, so not at all a stretch to bring it into the city, but it is a Pokemon that honestly has never quite stood out enough for me. I mean, it's single stage. Its design is like alright for a Pokemon that doesn't evolve, but it wouldn't be crazy to me if it had an actual evolved form. Its stats are nothing special. It's a carnivorous plant, but we already got that in Victory Bell. It gets Levitate, that's kind of neat. But yeah, Carnivine has just never quite been there as a Pokemon design for me, even as I've always wanted to like it. And so a Mega Evolution might be just the thing that the doctor ordered for it. And again, it's already right there in Kalos, so why not? And I think it's a good sign that I missed this Pokemon when I was scrolling through a list of every Pokemon. Definitely seems like it could use some attention. My number 4 pick for Generation 4 is Drifblim. Drifblim is a very cool Pokemon. It gets Unburden. I don't think it would have to keep Unburden with a Mega Form. Actually, no, it'd be useless because the Mega Stone, right? You know what I mean. You could do something with Flare Boost. You could give it a custom ability that plays a little bit differently with the concept of Flare Boost of being powered up by a burn. I don't know why I said custom ability. It's Game Freak, just a new ability. I'm speculating that this could be an interesting official Pokemon. Drifblim can do some cheesy stuff with Baton Pass, Tailwind. Of course, a lot of this grounded in Unburden, so if you don't have Unburden anymore, You need to come up with something different for it to do. I've always found Drifblim a little bit underwhelming in terms of its stats, other than Unburden boosted speed, and a little bit underwhelming in terms of move pool. You could go more in a like wind-oriented direction, right? You could even give it not Wind Rider probably, but maybe a special Wind Rider or something. You could go bigger balloon, greater control of wind. Let it learn Hurricane. There are a lot of different things you could do with Drifblim. It's a really interesting Pokemon with a lot of untapped potential. You'd have to pick a lane and tap a particular part of that potential, but there are a number of different things that they could do with it that I think would be a lot of fun. Number 3 for Generation 4, I'm going with Vespiquen. This is just a Pokemon that really obviously lends itself to the concept of Mega Evolution. It's already a big beehive. Bee and beehive. Hive also looking like a dress. I think it's pretty easy to exaggerate that design concept. Maybe, build some take the bees that it commands and build them into the design in a more overt way. Double down on the flavor of moves like Attack Order. Does Defend Order still exist? I don't think it does. Does Heal Order still exist? Well, you get the idea. I think Vespiquen is a Pokemon that was always a little bit overshadowed, but a very cool design and lends itself really well to the basic concept of Mega Evolution. Pretty easy inclusion for this list. Mega Male Combi could be fun, but I don't think they would do that. At number 2 for Generation 4, I have Spiritomb. Spiritomb is in an interesting place in the series because it's always been a little bit special, right? Even though it's not legendary or anything like that, there are always some Pokemon that are not in that sort of category but get a little bit of special attention given to them such that their role in the series feels like it's a little bit different from ordinary Pokemon of a region. The way that Spiritomb is encountered in Gen 4, the unique situation around that, the unique side quest that leads you to get Spiritomb in Legends Arceus, even things like the weird Spiritomb encounter at Sea Mobile and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Spiritomb is not legendary, but it's always been a Pokemon that stood out a little bit from the crowd. But I think it's kind of fallen off in recent years, not only because you can just go catch a wild Spiritomb just hanging around on the mountain in Scarlet and Violet, but also because it just doesn't really have much of a niche going for it in competitive play or even casual battling. It used to have no weakness unless the opponent used Foresight or Odor Sleuth on it, but that has not been the case since Generation 6, since it's weak to Fairy. These stats were kind of tanky, kind of interesting. Maybe you could do something with them in Generation 4. They really don't hold up now. Spiritomb, it's had some interesting movesets it can run here and there, but not really had any kind of clear niche in competitive play in a long time. And I think for a Pokemon that is treated as something a little bit special, as this like secret evil sealed away outside of the normal ecosystem of Pokemon for the most part, and it feels like a special encounter whenever it appears, I think it could use something to make it special once again. And so a Mega Evolution would be a pretty natural fit for it. That said, my number 1 pick for Generation 4 is Yanmega. Not only is it one of my favorite Gen 4 Pokemon, but also Mega Yanmega. That just seems like a slam dunk. So that list for Gen 4 is Carnivine, Drifblim, Vespiquen, Spiritomb, Yanmega. A couple of those feel like they'd be really easy, solid picks. Generation 5 is another generation that I think lends itself very nicely to this whole concept. There are a lot of Gen 5 designs that are interesting, but I think have room to go a bit further. As I'll talk about in another video that's coming up at some point, Generation 5 is, in my mind, like the closest thing to a rough patch in the series. There are a lot of Gen 5 designs that I like quite a lot, but if I were to talk about what Pokemon I like least in the series, Gen 5 shows up quite a bit, disproportionately represented. I do think there are a lot of hits in that generation, but I also think that it has an unusually high number of misses, which I guess is a reasonable thing to happen when it's the generation with the most Pokemon in it. So, narrowing it down to a list of 5 candidates for Mega Evolution was once again an interesting task, and I didn't exactly do that because this is actually the only instance in the video where one spot is going to be occupied by 3 different Pokemon. We have a 3-way tie for the number 5 pick, and I think you can probably guess what it is. Simisage, Simisear, and Simipour are together my 5th place choice for new Pokemon to get Mega Evolution in Legends ZA from Generation 5. These monkeys have always been sort of an interesting concept. They're kind of like pseudo-starters in their generation, right? They mirror the starter-type triangle. I think they even get pledge moves, so you're not going to be able to check. But, oh, they do get... Maybe they don't... Maybe they don't get pledge moves. They do get the starters' abilities as their hidden abilities. So they have that little hint of a connection there. Of course, the Striaton Gym kind of plays around with teaching you the type triangle using the monkeys. You get gifted a monkey. Charon has a monkey. They're sort of starter adjacent in that way. But there's not been a whole lot more done with them than that. Their designs are not especially interesting. They're just monkey, but make it this type. If I had to pick just one to get a Mega, it would be my personal favorite of the three, which is Simisage. But I think it's better if you make them stand out from each other a little bit more by taking them all, I don't know what the idea would be here, but taking them in slightly different design directions with Mega Evolution. And make these Pokemon that are an unusual concept in the series and kind of a bold one, but fall a little bit short of being really interesting Pokemon designs. Take them to that next level. There also is a nice Kalos tie-in there, right? Because all three of them appear in Santaloon Forest early in X and Y. So they're early game encounters that you might want to use for a little while in your journey, but then they don't really hold up power-wise or just interesting design-wise when there's so many Pokemon choices available over the rest of the game. And they just haven't gotten much attention from the series at all in recent years. They've kind of been... In fact, I think they're some of the very few Pokemon that have not yet appeared on the Nintendo Switch. So let's have them come back with a bang. Why not? Every Pokemon is someone's favorite. I don't think these should just be memory hold by Game Freak and left buried. My number 4 pick for Generation 5, and this is another one where I just want to see what happens if they double down on this Pokemon's design. I think this would be ridiculous. It's kind of a ridiculous one already. It's a pretty intense design already, but that just makes me curious to know what would happen if they went even further. My number 4 pick is Darmanitan. Darmanitan is a crazy creature already. I mean, look at this thing. Look at that grin. Look at those eyebrows. Look at those stats. This is something you can catch before the 3rd gym, just before the 3rd gym, or well before the 4th in Black and White. It gets Sheer Force on top, and then Z mode. Got ZA on the brain. Z mode is just a wild ability. This thing is nuts, and I want to see how much more nuts they can make it, and that's why it's on this list. Number 3 on this list, very different, more of a Seeking kind of vibe, but not quite full Seeking, maybe more of a Sudowoodo kind of vibe. It's Beartic. Beartic is a Pokemon design that I've always, since Gen 5 was new, thought was kind of just like not quite there. Like a polar bear is a very powerful, imposing creature. One of the most powerful, imposing creatures that we have in real life. And Beartic is like fine, I don't dislike it, but it's always felt to me like it's not quite at the level of powerful, imposing design that I would expect a fully evolved polar bear to be at. It's always felt like a little bit of a shortcoming for me, and it's exactly the kind of thing that Mega Evolution could fix very easily. Also, it's an ice type with Swift Swim, which makes it stand out from the rest of the Swift Swim crowd, which are mostly water types, and even could use the cover into grass type opponents, right? I say keep Swift Swim on Mega Beartic, commit to making it this large, powerful creature. Could be a lot of fun. Again, if it becomes available in competitive play, it could be a lot of fun. Number 2 for Generation 5, I have a very specific reason for this, and I know it's come up in recording my Unova Revisited series. I'm not sure it's come up in any of the episodes that are out yet, but it's Gigalith, and that is because in an unusual move for this list, I'm not an artist, I don't design Pokemon, I have a very specific idea as to what I'd like to see done with it. When I saw Gigalith, when Generation 5 was coming out, I didn't have the games yet. They were probably only out in Japan, if that, because back then Pokemon games came out in Japan months earlier than anywhere else. I saw Gigalith, and of course I was very used to rock types being sort of pigeonholed into this tanky, physical tank role. Think Golem, think Onix with his massive defense stat, not much of an attack stat. Think Rampardos, massive attack, not much defense, but they were physical attackers or physical tanks. I saw these prominent gems on Gigalith's body, and of course the move Power Gem had been added in Generation 4, and I thought this could be probably still tanky. I mean, look at its body shape, but this could be the special attacking rock type that was kind of a weird, unusual concept in a lot of people's heads at the time. Instead, it was another physical tank. I mean, it's basically the Golem of its environment, since Gen 5 tried to set up the Unova region as a separate environment far away from the rest of the Pokemon world that we'd seen so far, with its whole own different ecosystem full of Pokemon, some of which filled similar roles to the ones that we're familiar, but you know, they were the equivalent creatures in an entirely different part of the world. So that's kind of the Golem clone, and it kind of looks like a Golem with that physical power, physical bulk, low speed. But I really saw this design and thought maybe this is the special attacking rock type that we've been wanting. And with Mega Evolution, you can add to stats. You can also take away from stats. I don't think they usually do a drastic redistribution unless it's like Mega Diancie, which is a special case with the mythical Pokemon, losing a ton of bulk to gain a lot of offense. But I would not be mad at all if they just chopped up Gigalith's attack stat and gave a bunch to its special attack when it Mega Evolves, and committed to Power Gem or a new attack that's like a stronger Power Gem. Meteor Beam would be iffy because you can't hold a Power Herb. Of course, it could still have Sandstream as its ability, or they could come up with something else. Sand Force could be interesting. But yeah, make Gigalith that tanky rock-type special attacker with the gems yet more prominently featured in its design that I thought it was going to be, more or less, back when Gen 5 was new. And my number one pick for Generation 5, I did mean to give an honorable mention. I forgot. The honorable mention is Zoroark. Zoroark was originally billed as kind of a special Pokemon like Lucario. They pretty clearly were trying to capture the magic they'd had from with Lucario, with another humanoid, canid, unusual Pokemon with a lot of attention put into its design, and in Zoroark's case, a very unique and game-changing ability. But Zoroark did not catch on like Lucario did, and it's gotten a regional variant now that is very cool, but it kind of fell off and was just turned into an ordinary encounter in some places at some points in the middle there. So Mega Zoroark, to give it a little bit of a boost. When Mega Lucario has existed so long, I think it would be kind of fair, but it's not enough to get Zoroark a spot on this list. That was the honorable mention. Back to number one. It's Sawsbuck. I really like Sawsbuck. Sawsbuck is very cool concept for a Pokemon, very cool design. The variation across seasons is interesting. Now, I'm sure ZA will not have a season cycle. There hasn't been a season cycle since Generation 5, but I absolutely am suggesting, and I know this is an amount of work that Game Freak would probably not want to put into one Pokemon, but I am suggesting 4 separate Sawsbuck Mega Evolution designs. The antlers with the different designs based on the season, obviously the antlers aren't the only differences, but they're the most prominent differences. They're a pretty good start. Push it further. See what you can do with Sawsbuck's foliage. 4 different forms, please. Mega Sawsbuck. Commit to making it the embodiment of each season in its design. Once again, the Generation 5 list for this video. Number 5, we've got Simisage, Simisear, and Simipour together. Then it's Darmanitan, Beartic, Gigalith, and Sawsbuck. On to Generation 6, the debut generation for Mega Evolution. Honestly, not... Well, at first it wasn't the easiest to come up with candidates for Mega Evolution. I found a decent number of candidates in the end. Of course, it feels a little bit weird because Generation 6 was almost untouched by Mega Evolution. The only Gen 6 Pokemon that has a Mega back in Gen 6 is Diancie, which of course is a mythical Pokemon. I also am not sure that existed before Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Maybe it did, I don't remember. But they were really trying back then to treat Mega Evolution as this mysterious, obscure, little-known thing, unlike newer generation gimmicks where they're just all over the region and massively integrated into the culture. I don't think it's a mystery why they made that design change. The way Mega Evolution is implemented is a little bit weird. And it's definitely kind of weird that it was treated as an enhancement for past gen Pokemon and largely kept out of the current generation. So a lot of options for Gen 6. I'm again staying away from the starters and legendaries. I think that they are very strong candidates if we were making predictions to get Mega Forms in Legends ZA. I think Mega Chestnut, Mega Delphox, Mega Greninja seem like very likely things that Game Freak could do. Maybe Mega Xerneas, Yveltal, and Zygarde too. But I am staying away from that for my list. But I didn't say anything about mythicals. We are going to have a mythical here. My number 5 pick for Generation 6 is Volcanion. Now, this would be a little unfortunate for me, unless it's catchable in Legends ZA, which it might well be the way they treat mythicals so far. Because, fun fact, I keep a living dex in Pokemon Home. A few years ago, I put in the work to build a living Pokedex so that I can have easy access to any Pokemon I need for VGC or whatever it might be. And there was a year that they did a bunch of legendary distributions through the internet, through GameStop. They did it a few different ways. I lived in Toronto at the time. It was pretty easy for me to get the GameStop distributions. I can't usually get any of them when they do them now. And so I have almost every mythical Pokemon in game. There are only 2 Pokemon, forget mythical, there are only 2 Pokemon in the entire game that I don't have sitting in home right now. One is Zarude, and the other is Volcanion, because I was not living in Toronto when they distributed that. So it'd be a little I think there's a good chance Volcanion will be catchable in ZA, but if not, it would be a little unfortunate for me if this were one of the few Pokemon selected for a Mega Form. But I think Volcanion has always been a little bit... It's just been a tiny bit lackluster as a mythical design for me. I feel like arriving as far into the series as it did, mythical design needed to do a little bit more. Being the first fire and water type is pretty cool, but otherwise, I don't really know what its place is in the world, right? It doesn't really... It's the awkward kind of mythical. Actually, Zarude is kind of like this too, where it doesn't really have clear lore. It's not really clear why it's mythical. What it is that's so special about it, other than in Volcanion's case, its unique type combination. And its design is pretty cool, and obviously there's a cool signature move, but I feel like more could be done with its design to make it stand out, given that unlike Mew being the common ancestor that learns so many different moves, or Celebi traveling in time, or Jirachi granting wishes, it's not really clear in the lore what makes this stand out, and I don't really think the design necessarily makes up for that. Look at that shiny though. So I think you could commit harder to Volcanion blasting steam out of its appendages. You could give it more appendages. You could give it bigger appendages. You could really design it to blast things. There are ways that you can double down on this design that would give it that little bit more intensity that a lot of Pokemon were selected for in this list. I believe it's going to be the only mythical entry we see here, but I think it's a worthy inclusion, especially since Mega Evolution was created in its own debut generation. And there are two other Gen 6 mythicals. Diancie gets a Mega Evolution. Hoopa gets a crazy powerful form with restricted caliber stats. I actually think that's probably why Volcanion didn't stand out that much to me. Diancie gets to Mega Evolve. Hoopa gets its power unbound. Volcanion doesn't have anything like that to make it look comparable to them. And so, Volcanion always just kind of felt like the underwhelming... Oops, I didn't mean to replace it. Volcanion always felt... Isn't that an appropriate metaphor, though? Volcanion always felt like kind of the overshadowed mythical of its generation, not quite measuring up to the other two. So let's give it a chance to measure up now, shall we? My number 4 pick for Generation 6 is another just sort of simple one, Pokemon that is a pretty good design, but maybe needs a little bit more of a push to really stand out and be memorable. Also a very easy one to build on. It's Heliolisk. There's not much more to be said about it that hasn't been said about some other Pokemon here. Fans have had a lot of ideas for regular Heliolisk evolved forms for a long time. I don't think Game Freak has to go in the direction of like making it a fire type or whatever, but I definitely think they could come up with something to do to make this Pokemon grab a little bit more attention. And it's a cool design. It just could use that little bit of a boost. My number 3 pick for Generation 6 is Goodra. I think Goodra is made a little bit trickier by the fact that Mega Dragonite now exists, because both of them have that vibe of kind of a sillier, gentler dragon than a lot of the other dragon-type pseudo-legendaries like Salamence and Garchomp. I think Mega Dragonite, as I said, does an excellent job of really driving that design concept home for Dragonite. Really sort of committing to Dragonite's vibe and staying true to what this Pokemon is. I think that maybe you risk getting into similar territory if you also try to make a Mega Goodra around the same time. That said, Goodra has some qualities that stand out. It has interesting abilities, or you could go a different direction with that. It has its overall slimy gooiness that you could lean into. You could give it a second type like water, or maybe even poison. You certainly don't have to, but you know, I guess it's just a question if they can. And so many other pseudo-legendaries also have Mega Evolved forms, especially with this one just newly gaining one, when Tyranitar, Garchomp, Salamence, Metagross already have them. And Goodra is the pseudo-legendary of the generation that debuted Mega Evolution, so it's kind of conspicuously left out. I think it could be a little bit tricky to do Dragonite and Goodra at the same time, but I think there are probably ways they could pull it off. My number 2 pick for Generation 6 is Klefki. Klefki has always been one of my favorite Gen 6 Pokemon. It's just a really unique and interesting Pokemon design. I think it's an easy one to build on again. It's a ring-shaped metal fairy with keys. You can make that bigger. You can make the keys look different. There are, I think, pretty simple ways that you can take this design further than it is right now. And Klefki is just a really fun, creative take from early on in the fairy type's existence on what a fairy type Pokemon can be. And I'd be happy to see them do more with it. And my number 1 pick for Generation 6, Klefki, I already said, gets here partly because it's one of my favorite Gen 6 Pokemon. Another of my favorite Gen 6 Pokemon, and one of my favorites overall, is Noivern. Very cool design, just not a super strong Pokemon. sometimes has moments where it seems like it could be pretty strong, but always ends up kind of overshadowed. I even drafted it in the PDL once, but was underwhelmed with its performance, which is pretty sad because it is a Pokemon that I like quite a lot. It has, besides being an awesome bat dragon, it has the gimmick of doing big sound damage. It gets Boom Burst. You could do something. Maybe don't give it Aerolate. Aerolate Boom Burst sounds pretty broken. You know what? Maybe that's what Mega Noivern needs to stand out and be an imposing creature. Not that Noivern has to be crazy imposing, right? It's not that style of dragon, but I'm down to see Noivern, a Pokemon design that I like quite a lot, become actually strong finally. And so again, my Gen 6 list is Volcanion, Heliolisk, Goodra, Klefki, and Noivern. On to Generation 7. Funnily enough, it actually gets kind of difficult from here. All three of the remaining generations I had some trouble with in terms of choosing good Pokemon candidates for Mega Evolution. I'm not sure whether that's because they're newer Pokemon, and so I don't have as many reasons to dig into, right? Like, I don't have as much history with them. Like, I could say Seeking has been overshadowed for almost 30 years, or I had this thought about Sunflora years ago, or I just really like Noivern. It's a Pokemon that I've liked a lot for a long time, right? That long time gets a lot shorter as we get into newer generations, and so maybe I have fewer reasons to pick a particular Pokemon in that way. But also, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Let me know if you have an insight. There might be something different about how they're doing Pokemon designs now that makes it harder to come up with candidates for Mega Evolution. Actually, one other thing. I say that some of these Pokemon seem kind of overshadowed, seem like they could use a little bit of an extra flair to their designs now. I think that does kind of speak to the design concept of behind Pokemon now, because a lot of older generation Pokemon are kind of plainer creatures than you'll see in newer generation Pokemon, right? A lot of newer generation Pokemon, they have something more dynamic to them, they have something more expressive, whatever it might be. They're not just like a camel with volcano humps. I love Camerupt. Camerupt is an awesome Pokemon design, but it's a little bit more plain. It has a little bit less of a spark to it than you see in a typical, just middle of the region new Pokemon design in the current generations. And I think that might be why it's the newer generations. I think that might be a little part of why it's a little bit harder to come up with Mega Evolution candidates for newer gen Pokemon. However, a little bit harder, but it may be, but it's certainly doable. And I do have a top 5 list for each remaining generation. My top 5 list for Gen 7 starts with one that I'm pretty iffy on, though. It is number 5, Mimikyu. Mimikyu is my favorite Gen 7 Pokemon, so a little bit of bias there. I do actually think, I'm not sure that it's a design that lends itself well to Mega Evolution. I think there are a lot of ways it could go wrong, but I think they could do something interesting with the costume, right? It'd be kind of funny if the costume became more Raichu-like. That might be a little bit unreasonable. That might be pushing the difference from the underlying design too far. Again, a big part of the design challenge, in my opinion, for Mega Evolution is that you want it to stand out from the original, but you also want it to be very recognizably the original. So this looking as much as it does like an ordinary Dragonite, that's why I'm not bothered by that. It's why I have in the past criticized Mega Heracross, which to me looks like an entirely different Pokemon from regular Heracross. I think that would be going too far. Maybe if you made this costume look like a Raichu, that might be going too far too. I don't know. But you also could. The other thing about Mimikyu is we don't know the underlying creature, right? We never get to find out what it looks like under this costume. We see this little hunched over shape, very shadowy. You could make the costume bigger, but also kind of like misshapen, maybe imply that the creature under it has taken on a strange new form that we can't quite understand. Again, I think it would be a tricky one to pull off. I'm not confident that it would actually be good, but I think that there are some interesting things they could do with it conceivably, and that's just enough to get it onto this list. At number 4 for Generation 7, I'm going with Pyukumuku. I think this one would be funny. I'm not quite being tongue-in-cheek like I was with Charizard, but I am saying they should do this one because it would be funny. I would stick to the gimmick of giving it no direct damaging attacks except technically counter. Make it however tanky you want. Exaggerate these features however you want. Kind of the spikies, the what is it? Is it stomach that comes out that kind of looks like a hand? I just think it would be really, really funny. And some people who want like an awesome, badass Mega Evolution might be disappointed, but I think Mega Evolution, like a lot of Pokemon mechanics and designs, is at its best when there's a variety of different kinds of creatures. I think it's good that we have, aggressive, cool-looking Mega Tyranitar or dangerous looking Mega Garchomp, but then we also have stuff like this with a very different kind of vibe, occupying kind of a different place in the design philosophy of the series. And I think Pyukumuku slots very nicely into that silly, funny creature slot. Number 3, I'm going with Lurantis. This is another Seaking or Beartic, maybe more of a Beartic than a Seaking. This is a Pokemon that has kind of an interesting design. It's a very cool concept, taking the real-world concept of a flower that looks like a bug and inverting it to a bug. No, a bug that looks like a flower and inverting it to a flower that looks like a bug. There we go. That's why Lurantis is a grass type. I have had in my head for a long time that this Pokemon gets chlorophyll. I think just because it uses Solar Blade with a partner that sets up Sun in its what's it called? Totem? What this Pokemon are called in Sun and Moon? In that battle, I just sort of like assumed it had chlorophyll. It looked like something that could. I actually don't think you have to give it chlorophyll if it Mega Evolves. You could stick with Contrary, but you could stick with chlorophyll too. Come up with something. But also because it is meant to look like a flower, it's a pretty easy design to build on, right? You can make it bloom brighter. And it would take a Pokemon that's a very cool concept, but a little bit on the weak side, and give it a chance to shine. Kind of like Beartic. Not as much like Seaking, because honestly, Seaking's problem is partly that it's not that cool a concept, but again, overshadowed Pokemon, give it a chance to shine. Lurantis, I think, fits the bill. At number 2 for Generation 7, I'm going with Toucanon. I think this is another easy one to come up with design-wise. Toucanon is obviously a bird, it's a toucan, but it also sort of incorporates elements of a gun in its design. Being able to fire things from its beak, but also heat up its beak. And use it that way with move Beak Blast. Of course, its Prevo Trumbeak is more about making sound with its beak. It gets sound-based moves. Its beak kind of looks like a trumpet. There are a number of different inspirations you can go with Toucanon's beak, but I think it's pretty easy to design a Mega form somewhere around that feature. And Toucanon is another early game bird that's a little bit not especially interesting to a lot of players because we've seen a lot of these normal flying birds with not amazing stats before. Toucanon's attack stat is actually higher than I realized. It gets some good abilities in Skill Link and Sheer Force. You can pick one of those and work around it. And yeah, do more sort of projectiles with the beak. Maybe open up its move pool to more beam attacks and focus the beak on that. Or go back to the sound inspiration, or who knows what. There are a lot of different directions you could take it, and regardless, it's kind of like Noctowl in that it's for a normal and flying early game Pokemon, it already stands out from the crowd a little bit, and you can push that further, I think, pretty easily in its Mega design. And my number 1 pick for Generation 7 is Ribombee. Mostly, I just really like Ribombee. Ribombee was on my first somewhat decent VGC team that I ever built by myself. Back in early Sword and Shield, there was a combo with Ribombee and Gigantamax Snorlax. Basically, Snorlax with Gigantamax, it would boost its, it would double its HP, get all big and bulky, and then it would use Belly Drum. And of course, Snorlax gets Gluttony, so you would give it Belly Drum and one of the more, lower HP, higher recovery berries like a Figgy Berry. And with Gluttony, the Belly Drum would activate the berry, it would get nice and healthy. It's nice and healthy, still gets Gigantamaxed. And then Snorlax's G-Max move was G-Max Replenish, which not only did a bunch of normal type damage, but also gave it the ability to get its berry back. So tons of power, tons of bulk, yet more recovery on top of the recovery you already had. Only thing missing is speed. And back then, Ribombee could learn Speed Swap. You can see it's a fast Pokemon. It's got a very nice speed stat for low power format. Speed Swap does exactly what it sounds like, swaps the speed stat of the user and the target, so it would make Snorlax as fast as Ribombee. And Ribombee then would be as slow as Snorlax, but that's fine. Snorlax is your main damage dealer. Plus, with Ribombee being a fairy type, it was also very useful on that team to check fighting types that were threatening to Snorlax itself, but also some of my Pokemon on the team. So Ribombee is a Pokemon that I have very fond competitive memories of. I would love to see it be good again, but I haven't yet found an instance where it seems like it is. It doesn't even get Speed Swap anymore, which is really disappointing. I would love to do something with Ribombee again. It's a very cute Pokemon. I think you could exaggerate some of these features very nicely into a very cute, visually appealing Mega design, and I would love to see Ribombee put in work in competitive play again. So it is my number 1 pick for Gen 7. The Gen 7 list is Mimikyu, Pyukumuku, Lurantis, Toucanon, Ribombee. Getting into the home stretch now, and good, because this has been so long. Going to Generation 8. Again, a little bit tricky for me to make a list. Honestly, kind of hard to find very many Pokemon that I thought interested me much with Mega Forms. We're going to start with Weirdeer. to some extent, honestly, I kind of just wanted some Legends Arceus representation in there, but also Weirdeer. It's a very cool, it's a very neat design. I'm not actually sure how much more you can build on it. It already emphasizes the Stantler hypnotic antlers even more. You can probably find something more to do with it. Maybe have them get like entangled with each other. That could be a pretty neat design touch for a Pokemon that sort of warps your perception of reality. But you know, some of the new evolved forms that came out of Legends Arceus are fascinating in competitive play, for better or for worse. Pokemon like Ursaluna, Sneasler, Basculegion, I've had a lot of fun using all of those. Even Overquill has had its moments to shine. Weirdeer has never stood out quite as much. It's not bad. It's a Trick Room setter that can Intimidate, but I think it could use a little bit more of a power boost to keep up with those others. And for our Legends Arceus pick, there's maybe Cleavor, but I don't know what you do with Cleavor. I mean, Scizor is a Mega Form already, but I don't really know what you do with Cleavor. Do you make the axes bigger? They're pretty big already. So Weirdeer, I think, gives us a little bit more to work with. At number 4 for Generation 8, I'm going with Cramorant. I really like Cramorant, and I can't quite understand why. When I first saw it, I thought it was like a kind of a plain bird flying in water, nothing we haven't seen before. But something about this goofy design just really grew on me, and now Cramorant is solidly one of my favorite Gen 8 Pokemon, and Gulp Missile helps a lot too. Gulp Missile is this very silly ability that makes for a lot of very silly, fun moments in competitive play. It's a shame that Cramorant is not very good. Maybe a Mega Form could help with that, because Gulp Missile is just such a fun ability to use because so much weird stuff happens, and it also looks very funny in game with Cramorant having an Arrokuda or a Pikachu in its mouth. Mega Evolve it, maybe it can get something else in its mouth. Again, I don't think you can go too far with that without kind of losing the spirit of it, but maybe you can get a Barraskewda in there, or maybe there's some other fish Pokemon that I haven't thought of yet. But also, I think Cramorant also just has kind of weird, gangling, funny proportions and features that also lend to the charm of the design. Again, Pokemon that I thought looked kind of plain at first, but found just bizarrely super charming once I got used to it. I think if you exaggerate Cramorant's features, double down on this silly looking bird, I think you get something pretty funny out of that. Maybe even give it like more of a raptor kind of look. And again, you can maybe change what's in its mouth with Gulp Missile, or give it some other variant ability. Although I think Gulp Missile is a key part of Cramorant's charm, so if you give it a new ability, it probably has to work pretty similarly. But I think they could do something very funny with that. Number 4 for Generation 8, I'm going with Greedent. Honestly, the more I talk about this, the more I think maybe Cramorant should move up to number 3 and Greedent drop to 4. I don't feel super inspired about Greedent, but honestly, Greedent, you could go kind of a Gigantamax Snorlax-esque direction. I don't mean literally a tree going on its body, growing out of its body, but it's a big round creature that eats a lot. It's not a terribly hard thing to double down on. Make it bigger, make it rounder, incorporate the berries more into its design somehow. Maybe Greedent is what it eats and its body starts to resemble a berry. That could be kind of funny. I think maybe Mega Cramorant, exaggerating Cramorant's features would be funnier, so I am going to bump Cramorant up to the number 3 slot. But I think there are some pretty simple things you could do with Greedent that could be pretty entertaining. And we are going to get one more normal type in this Gen 8 list. We're going to go 3 for 5 on normal types, because my number 2 pick is Dubwool. Wooloo is a very successful sort of unofficial mascot of Generation 8. Game Freak knew they had a hit there, or the Pokemon Company knew that Game Freak had a hit there. I think Wooloo is a pretty widely loved Pokemon. It's a fairly simple, round, floofy sheep design, but what more do you need? Dubwool is its evolved form. It's a nice design too. I like it, but it just doesn't hold up, stats performance-wise. Some interesting abilities. I don't know what I'd go with if I were Mega Evolving it, but yeah, let's give grown-up Wooloo its due. I think you want a marketable Mega Pokemon that really entertains the masses, but is not reaching all the way back to Gen 1 or tripling down on Charizard. I think Dubwool is kind of a slam dunk as long as you get the design right. That said, my number 1 pick for Generation 8 is Pincurchin, because Pincurchin is such an awkward Pokemon in terms of gameplay. There have been so many times, I did use Pincurchin occasionally in Gen 8 when it learned Rising Voltage, but there have been so many times in competitive play that I've wanted to use Pincurchin, but just could not justify it. It is the only Pokemon with Electric Surge other than Tapu Koko, right? Yeah, Tapu Koko doesn't exist in Scarlet and Violet. You can set electric terrain with Miraidon's Hadron engine, but outside of restricted formats, it's just Pincurchin. Grassy terrain gets Rillaboom. Psychic terrain gets Indeedee. Misty terrain gets Galarian Weezing. That's not great, because why are you using Galarian Weezing if not with neutralizing gas? But it's still better than Pincurchin. Pincurchin is so bad. Pincurchin has a terrible move pool. Its stats are awful, except that it has very low speed that makes it kind of interesting in Trick Room, except what's going to do in Trick Room. It doesn't even get Rising Voltage anymore for some reason. It gets a pretty uninspiring mix of attacks. It doesn't even get Helping Hand to support a teammate. Honestly, when I have used Pincurchin, I've mostly just committed to the bit with Acupressure and spammed silly random stat boosts, ideally evasiveness into teammates. Most recently, I actually did that in a grassroots tournament I played where only very low usage Pokemon were allowed, and I built my team around all the least used Future Paradox Pokemon with Pincurchin, and I got some funny good luck with Acupressure there. So Pincurchin is not 100,000% without a niche, but I think the only Electric Surge user other than Tapu Koko really should be able to do better than this. And so I don't think it should take Mega Evolution to make Pincurchin a little bit more interesting. I think they could be a little bit less punishing with its move pool. But if Mega Evolution is what's available, might as well see it. And so my Gen 8 list is Weirdeer, Greedent, Cramorant, Dubwool, Pincurchin. Honestly, I don't feel that strongly about Weirdeer. Let me know if you have a better idea. Maybe Flapple and Appleton could be fun. They already got G-Max forms, but I mean, those aren't around anymore, and Diplin gets to evolve into Hydrapple. Maybe Flapple and Appleton could be fun. Finally, that leaves Gen 9. As you know, another kind of difficult one for me. Not super inspired by any of these picks, but I have made 5 picks all the same. Number 5 for me in Generation 9 is Veluza, because when was the last time you saw this Pokemon do anything notable? It's got a bold design. It's sort of memorable just for charging at you on the lake. It gets Sharpness with a not too terrible attack stat. It gets a very unique attack and Fill It Away, which is like a Shell Smash clone, except instead of losing HP, instead of losing defenses, it does lose HP. Very bold design. But one of the most, as a VGC player, one of the most forgettable Gen 9 Pokemon. When has this ever done anything? So hey, give it a Mega, give it a chance to do something. Number 4 for Generation 9, I'm going with Glamora. Honestly, just because I think Mega Glamora would be beautiful to look at. It's a little bit weird, right? Because Glamora is so implicitly tied into the Terra mechanic, being strongly implied to be basically Terra Crystals and poison Terra Crystals in living form. But, hey, who says mechanics can't interact like that? And Glamora already has it's a little bit like Starmie, and it has kind of a beautifully mysterious, inscrutable design. Glamora has eyes, which makes it a little bit more expressive than Starmie, but still a mysterious creature with a lot of implied lore that's not really expanded on. And you could make something pretty visually stunning, I think, by doubling down on its flower made of stone aesthetic. So it'd be a little bit of a weird one, but I think they could really cook something interesting with that design. Number 3 for Generation 9, I'm going with Revavroom. Maybe I could drop Revavroom below Glamora, but Revavroom is a very silly creature. No, I think it's fine where it is. It's a very silly creature. We've already seen it power the Starmobiles. I don't think a good Mega form would look anything like that, but you could certainly go bigger with this mock car with an ancient creature attached to a bunch of rocks. By the way, Revavroom, part of its design is that, so it's the metal creature, that's why it's a steel and poison type. Part of its design is that it attaches itself to a bunch of rocks and lugs them around to make this pseudo body. You could give it like Rocky Payload as an ability, and maybe incorporate, let me just look at Bombardier so I can take a look at Rocky Payload. You give it Rocky Payload, and Bombardier, of course, drops rocks. That's why this ability is flavored for it. You can incorporate that into Revavroom somehow, make it shoot rocks at the opponent, make a design that looks like a creature that does that. You can just make it zoom around even faster. It's an oddball design for sure, with some interesting areas to potentially expand on. So easy candidate for this list. At number 2 for Generation 9, I'm going with Cyclizar. I like Cyclizar. I used it in my in-game playthrough of Violet, but Cyclizar really suffers from the fact that its Paradox relatives are restricted legendaries that are on the cover of the game. I get that it's an intentional choice, that Cyclizar is just an ordinary Pokemon in this region, but In fact, it was Heath's partner in his journey into Area Zero, and I used to have fun speculating on what that might imply, if anything, about the lore behind Koraidon and Miraidon. Probably nothing in the end, but intentional choice or not, it does just kind of suffer from being very badly overshadowed and just being kind of a plain Pokemon that doesn't stand out that much next to those. It does have a little bit of a gimmick going for it already. It gets Regenerator, it has pretty high speed, and it gets Shed Tail. So it gets to be, Earthworm is kind of the slow Shed Tail passer, which I think is more useful in a lot of situations, but Cyclizar gives you a fast Shed Tail, and with Regenerator, potential to do it multiple times. That's a nice gimmick, but it's just not a very strong Pokemon beyond that, so it doesn't hold up very well in competitive play. And yeah, design-wise, it's just hard to be super interested in this design when Koraidon and Miraidon debuted in the same generation. So I don't want Cyclizar to turn into a big restricted caliber legendary powerhouse like them, but I think you could do something with Mega Evolution to make it stand on its own a little bit more. And finally, my number one pick for Generation 9. How many of you remember that Cloth is in the game? It actually had a role in the story too. It was a Titan Pokemon. When was the last time you thought about Cloth? Look at this shiny. I said that Veluza is maybe the most forgettable Pokemon in Gen 9. I have thought that for quite a while. It doesn't help that it doesn't really have a role in the story other than Kofu saying Volt and Veluza all the time. But when was the last time you thought about Cloth? I think Cloth is a strong contender for most forgettable. And that's really sad because it has a very interesting ability in Anger Shell. Also, Shell Smash variant, this being Shell Smash the ability instead of Shell Smash the move. Maybe there's just not a whole lot else going for its design, huh? It's a big stone crab. We've seen big crab Pokemon before. It has kind of a funny name, but not a very interesting, memorable one. The most notable thing about it is Anger Shell. But it just doesn't really hold up that well for a Pokemon design this far into the generation, does it? It's a little bit plain, it's a little bit forgettable, it's a little bit forgotten. So let's see what they can do with Mega Cloth. And so the Gen 9 list is Veluza, Glamora, Revavroom, Cyclizar, Cloth. This has been going on for a while. Kind of feels like we could use a recap of the entire list. I don't want to do that, though. That would just be a long list. I named a lot of Pokemon. The number one pick for each generation is Gen 1, Starmie, Gen 2, Sunflora, Gen 3, Flygon, Gen 4, Yanmega, Gen 5, Sawsbuck, Gen 6, Noivern, Gen 7, Ribombee, Gen 1, Pincurchin, and Gen 9, Cloth. But I identified a lot of other interesting Pokemon that I'd be very interested in seeing get Mega Forms along the way. Whether it's Slowking finally getting a chance to shine. Slowking was on the list, but I meant Seeking finally getting a chance to shine. Maybe do something with Lightning Rod. Beartic finally getting to that big, imposing level that I always thought was kind of missing from it as a fully evolved polar bear Pokemon. Whether it's seeing just how crazy they can get with Darmanitan's design, or just how big Wailord can get, or whether it is, or just how funny Cramorant can get. Whether it's making Ribombee interesting for me in VGC again, assuming these Megas ever make it to VGC. I'm not actually assuming that, but if they do. Whether it's finally giving some proper love to the 3 monkeys from Gen 5. Whether it's reviving my long ago dream of Gigalith being a gem-oriented special attacker, whether it's making Cloth or Veluza memorable, whether it's finally giving Sunflora something for the Sunflora fans to get excited about in battle. I think there's a lot of potential for a lot of different Pokemon. I don't think they're going to make this many new Megas, but we were just doing some whiskashing here. Let me know in the comments if there's anything I didn't talk about that makes your list. I think for anyone watching, there's a very good chance that there is, because there are so many possibilities. And I think they had a really strong start with Mega Dragonite, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else is yet to come.